My name is Frank Peterson. I'm 67 years old. For 30 years, I work for the U.S. government in a capacity I'm still not entirely comfortable discussing in detail. Let's just say my work with the agency involved a lot of quiet observation, a lot of patience, and the ability to notice when one small thing is out of place. It wasn't kicking down doors. It was noticing a scuff mark on a floor that shouldn't be there, or the way a person's gaze lingers a half-second too long. My entire career was built on seeing what others missed and understanding what it meant. When I retired, I wanted the opposite of all that. I wanted quiet that was just quiet, not the silence between threats. I bought a small plot of land up in the Pacific Northwest, backed up against a national forest in the Cascade foothills. The kind of place where your nearest neighbor is a mile down a gravel road, and the loudest sound at night is the wind in the Douglas firs. I'm telling you this not to impress you, but so you understand I'm not the kind of man given to flights of fancy. I don't believe in ghosts. I was skeptical of UFOs, and if someone had come to me with the story I'm about to tell you, I would have nodded politely while internally drafting a psychological profile of a man losing his grip on reality. But I've learned that the world is a much larger, older, and stranger place than our well-lit, well-documented lives would have us believe. What I saw, and I'm sharing it now because I'm getting older, and the weight of it is getting heavier. Maybe it's just a story to you. For me, it's the reason I keep a loaded 12-gauge next to my bed and why I never go into the woods after dusk anymore. Before I get into what happened, if you find this kind of account valuable, consider subscribing. I don't know how many more of these I have in me, but I feel compelled to share what I know.
And do me a favor, drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're listening from. It helps, somehow, to know this isn't just being shouted into the void. All right? It was late October, about 4 years ago. The tourist season was long over, and that damp, persistent chill that signals the start of the real Pacific Northwest winter had settled in. The day it happened started like any other. The sky was a solid, unbroken sheet of gray, the kind that feels like a lid on the world. I'm a hobbyist geologist, a rock hound. It's what I do to keep my mind sharp and my body moving. My property has some interesting outcroppings, and the national forest behind it is a maze of old logging roads and creek beds that are great for finding quartz, agate, sometimes even a bit of jasper if you're lucky. After a light breakfast, I pulled on my boots, grabbed my pack with my rock hammer, some sample bags, a water bottle, and a high-powered flashlight. I also had Sam with me.
Sam was my German Shepherd, retired from canine work down in California. He was old, his muzzle was white, but his senses were still sharper than any piece of equipment I'd ever been issued. We had a routine, a long, meandering loop that would take us a few miles into the forest and back before lunch. The air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves. It was quiet, but it was a normal quiet. The chatter of a squirrel, the distant caw of a raven, the sound of my boots crunching on gravel and loam. Sam trotted ahead, his tail giving a lazy wag, sniffing at the base of ferns and marking his territory on old-growth stumps. We were about 2 miles in, following a creek that cut through a shallow ravine, when the quiet changed. It wasn't gradual, it was like a switch was flipped. One moment, the background hum of the forest was there, and the next, it was gone. The squirrel chatter stopped, the birds went silent, even the insects seemed to cease their buzzing. It was a dead, pressurized silence that I'd only experienced a few times before, usually in places overseas right before something very bad happened. It's a physical feeling. The air gets thick, the pressure in your ears changes. Sam felt it too. He stopped dead in the middle of the trail, his body rigid,
the fur along his spine standing up. His head was cocked, but not towards any specific sound. He was scanning, his nose twitching, tasting the air. A low, almost inaudible growl rumbled in his chest. My first thought, my trained thought, was a predator, cougar most likely, or a black bear. I stood still, listening. My hand rested on the handle of my rock hammer, which felt laughably inadequate. I did a slow 360-degree scan of the woods around us. The trees were thick, mostly fir and cedar, with a dense undergrowth of ferns and salal bushes. Everything was still. Too still. There was no wind. Not a single leaf trembled. This is the part that's hard to explain.
Along with the silence, there was a feeling. A deep instinctual sense of being watched by something intelligent. It wasn't the passive awareness of a deer or the predatory focus of a cat. This felt analytical, like I was being assessed. Sam took a half step back, pressing against my leg. He never did that. He was trained to move toward a threat, to be confident. His behavior was the single loudest alarm bell. He let out a soft whine, his eyes fixed on a section of the ravine wall about 100 yards upstream. It was just a jumble of moss-covered basalt and tangled roots, no different from the rest of the landscape. But he was locked onto it. I tried to rationalize. Maybe a bear den. Maybe a cougar protecting a kill. I whispered, "Easy, boy," just trying to calm him and maybe myself. But the feeling of dread was a cold knot in my stomach. It was a specific kind of dread, a feeling of fundamental wrongness. My mind was trying to fit it into a known box, animal, human, threat. But my gut was rejecting every explanation. I decided to trust the dog. We were turning back. But as I took a step to retreat, a smell hit me. It wasn't strong, just a faint trace on the air, but it was utterly alien. It was a mix of wet dog, old blood, and something metallic, like burnt copper wire. It was a sick smell. A smell of decay, but not the clean decay of the forest floor. This was rot. It was coming from the direction Sam was staring. Curiosity is a dangerous instinct. It's what kept me alive in my old job, but it's also what nearly got me killed a dozen times. Against my better judgment, and against the clear and present terror of my dog, I needed to know the source of that silence, that smell. I told Sam to stay, his paws practically glued to the ground, and I started moving slowly, carefully, toward the rock face. Every step felt deliberate, loud. My boots on the wet stones of the creek bed seemed to echo in the unnatural silence. I moved from the cover of one tree to another, just as I'd been trained, minimizing my exposure. The smell got stronger as I approached the rock face. It was thick, cloying. It made my eyes water. I had my flashlight in my hand now, even though it was daytime. The sky was so dark, and the woods so dense that some areas were in deep shadow. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't a cave, not really. More of a fissure, a deep crack in the basalt, partially hidden by a curtain of hanging moss and roots. The opening was maybe 4 feet high and 2 feet wide. It looked like a natural fracture in the rock, something I would normally have noted in my logbook and moved on. But the smell was pouring out of it. And there was something else. A sound. A faint, wet, rhythmic clicking, and a low, guttural rattle. It was the sound of breathing, but it was labored, broken. It sounded like a man with terminal pneumonia trying to draw breath through a throat full of gravel. My brain was still trying to make it make sense. A sick bear. That had to be it. A bear had crawled in there to die. It was the only logical explanation. But the smell was wrong. The sound was wrong. And the feeling of being watched hadn't dissipated. It had intensified, and it was coming from inside that black slit in the earth. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sam was whining behind me, a high, desperate sound. I knew I should leave. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to get the hell out of there, grab my dog, and not stop running until I was back inside my house with the doors locked. But the analyst in me, the part that had been honed for 30 years to find the source, to understand the anomaly, wouldn't let me go. I had to see. I took a deep breath, held it, and thumbed the switch on my flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, a solid white spear of light. I pointed it into the fissure. My first impression was just dark fur. A large, dark mass huddled against the back of the small cavern, which was only about 10 feet deep. Then the details started to resolve, and my mind simply stopped working for a second. It wasn't a bear. The beam of my maglite was steady in my hand, a habit born from years of needing to appear calm even when I wasn't. The light illuminated the thing huddled at the back of the fissure, and my brain went into overdrive trying to process the information, to categorize it. It failed completely. It was mammalian, covered in coarse, dark fur, mostly black with streaks of gray, like an old dog. It was sitting, slumped against the rock wall, its legs folded under it in a way that seemed impossibly wrong. One of its long, powerful arms was braced against the floor. The arm ended not in a paw, but in something that was disturbingly close to a human hand, but longer, with thick, dirty knuckles and tipped with yellowed, broken claws. The proportions were all wrong. The torso was too long and lean for a bear, the shoulders too broad. But the head, that was the part that broke my understanding of the world. It was canine, unmistakably. The long snout, the powerful jawline. It was like the head of a massive wolf, or a timber wolf, but it was sitting on a frame that was unnervingly hominid. Its ears were tall and pointed, one of them torn and ragged. Its eyes were open. The flashlight beam reflected off them, but it wasn't the green or white shine of a nocturnal animal. It was a dull, sickly yellow, like old brass. And there was intelligence in those eyes. Not animal cunning. It was a weary, ancient, and pain-filled intelligence. It watched me. It wasn't growling or baring its teeth. It was just watching my light, watching me. Its whole body was trembling with tiny, constant shudders. Its breathing was the rattling, wet sound I'd heard from the trail. One of its legs, the left one, was bent at a hideous angle. The fur was matted with dried blood and dirt, and I could see the glint of bone protruding from the skin just below the knee. It was a compound fracture, a grievous, septic-looking wound. This thing was dying, slowly and in agony. My fear was still there, a cold, hard stone in my gut, but it was now mixed with a sense of profound and terrible pity. This wasn't a monster from a nightmare. This was a wounded, dying creature, and I had stumbled into its final moments. It shifted its weight slightly, and a low groan escaped its throat. The sound was deep, resonant, and full of pain. It wasn't an animal sound. It had a timbre, a resonance that was almost vocal. It lifted its head, its yellow eyes never leaving mine. Then it did something that I will never forget. It slowly, deliberately, lifted its less injured arm, the one not braced on the ground. It extended that long, clawed hand and pointed, not at me, not at the entrance.
It pointed past me, deeper into the narrow cave, toward a section of the rock wall to my right. Its gaze followed the gesture, and it made another sound, a series of low, guttural clicks and a soft huff. It was an urgent sound. It was trying to tell me something. My legs were frozen. My mind was a whirlwind of terror, disbelief, and a sudden, overwhelming surge of the old professional curiosity. The creature, this ancient, dying sentinel, was pointing. It was a clear, unambiguous gesture of communication. Behind me, Sam had finally gone silent, as if he understood that the situation had shifted from one of threat to something else entirely. The creature held the gesture for a moment longer, its arm trembling with the effort, then let it drop with a heavy thud. Its head sank, and the rattling breaths grew shallower.
It had used a significant portion of its remaining energy to show me something. I had to know what it was. I have never been more afraid in my life. Not in the back alleys of foreign capitals, not during tense standoffs. I was in a small, enclosed space with a creature that defied all known biology. A creature that could have torn me to pieces in seconds if it were healthy. But it was dying, and it had shown me something. I made a decision that still feels insane in retrospect. I took a step deeper into the cave, moving past the creature. I had to squeeze between its hunched form and the opposite wall. The smell was suffocating. I could feel the heat radiating from its body, a feverish, unhealthy heat. Its yellow eyes tracked me as I passed, but there was no malice in them, only that same weary, pain-filled exhaustion. I kept my light trained on the spot it had indicated. It was just a blank section of rock wall, darker and damper than the rest. But as I got closer, I saw that it wasn't a solid wall. There was another fissure, a vertical crack barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through, leading back into absolute blackness. At the base of this second fissure was a collection of objects, arranged in a way that was disturbingly neat. It wasn't a random pile of trash. It was an arrangement. There was a faded red nylon backpack, the kind a day hiker would use. Next to it, a single muddy hiking boot, a woman's size. There was a leather wallet, swollen with moisture, and a set of car keys on a ring with a small plastic photo frame. I could just make out the smiling faces of a young family. And beside that, a child's toy. A small, plush dinosaur, its colors faded to pastel shades. My blood ran cold. These were trophies, mementos from kills. This wasn't just a dying animal's den. This was a larder, a way station. I crouched down, the beam of my flashlight shaking slightly now. I scanned the collection of items. A climbing rope, neatly coiled. A shattered pair of eyeglasses. A driver's license, laminated and eerily preserved, peeking out of the open wallet. I could read the name, Michael J. Rourke, age 34. I remembered the name from a local news report the previous year. A software engineer from Seattle who went for a day hike in this very area and never came back. They searched for weeks, found his car at the trailhead, but not a single trace of him. The official theory was that he'd fallen into a ravine or been taken by a cougar. But here was his wallet. Here were his keys. My gaze was drawn back to the fissure these items were laid before. A cold draft was coming from it, a cellar-cold air that smelled of damp stone, mold, and something else. Something foully organic and ancient. I leaned closer, straining my ears, and I could hear it. A low, rhythmic hum. It wasn't mechanical. It sounded like the thrumming of a million giant insects, a deep bass note that you felt more than you heard. And beneath that hum, another sound, faint and terrible, a chorus of low moans. It sounded like wind in a tunnel, but it had the cadence of suffering. This was the revelation. This was what the creature had shown me. This cave wasn't the end point. The bodies weren't here. This was just an entrance, a doorway, a processing point where they left the personal effects before taking the people themselves down into whatever hell lay below. This thing, this species, they weren't just mindless beasts. They were organized. They had a system. They were harvesting us. Just as this thought crystallized in my mind, a profound silence fell over the small cavern. The rattling, labored breathing behind me had stopped. I spun around, my light finding the creature. It was still slumped in the same position, but its head was now resting on the stone floor. Its chest was still. The great, suffering engine of its body had finally shut down. Its yellow eyes were open, staring blankly at the cave entrance, at the gray light of the world it had just departed. I was alone, in the dark, with a dead monster and a doorway to something far worse. My survival instinct finally took over, overriding the analyst. I started backing away, my eyes darting between the dead creature and the dark fissure. I didn't turn my back until I was out of the narrow passage and in the main part of the cave. Then I scrambled out of the entrance, stumbling into the gray daylight, gasping the clean, cold air. I didn't run. My training wouldn't let me. I moved quickly but tactically, checking behind me, using the trees for cover, until I had put 100 yards between me and that place. I found Sam huddled at the base of a tree, shivering. I clipped his leash on, and we moved, fast and quiet, back the way we came, leaving the terrible, pressurized silence of that ravine behind us. The walk back to my house was a blur. My senses were on high alert. Every snap of a twig, every shadow in the periphery, sending a jolt of adrenaline through me. The world felt thin, like a veneer stretched over something dark and predatory. When I finally saw the roof of my small house through the trees, I felt a wave of relief so powerful, my knees almost buckled. Inside, I locked the deadbolt, slid the chain, and closed all the blinds. I went to my gun safe and took out my Mossberg 590, the one I kept for home defense. I loaded it with double-aught buckshot and did a slow, methodical clear of my own house, just as I'd been trained. It was absurd, but I had to. Only when I was sure it was empty did I allow myself to sit down at the kitchen table. Sam was pressed against my leg, still trembling. I sat there for a long time, the shotgun across my lap, watching the tree line through a gap in the blinds, replaying every detail in my mind. The dying creature, the gesture, the collection of personal items. The fissure leading down into the dark. The sound. Who do you call? What do you say?
Hello, 911? I've found a dead werewolf and it showed me a portal to hell. Please advise.
They'd send a car for sure, probably two. One with a deputy and another with a couple of nice men in white coats. My background with the agency made me uniquely aware of how official channels handle high strangeness events. They either bury them in bureaucratic paperwork until they disappear, or they classify the witness as unreliable and quietly discredit them. I couldn't risk it. But I couldn't do nothing. Michael Rourke. His family deserved to know. Or at least, they deserved to have him back. The part of him that was left, anyway. The next day, I drove to a town 30 miles away. I found a gas station with an old payphone, fed it a handful of quarters, and dialed the county sheriff's non-emergency line. I disguised my voice, making it higher, a little shaky. I told the dispatcher I was a hiker, that I'd been off trail and had found what I thought might be human remains in a small cave. I said I thought it might have been a bear attack. I gave them the general location of the ravine, but was deliberately vague about the exact spot, describing landmarks that could be found in a dozen places along that creek. I told them I was scared and didn't want to give my name. Then I hung up. It was the best I could do. For the next 2 weeks, I scanned the local papers and news sites. Nothing. Then, a small article appeared on page B4 of the county ledger. Hiker's remains identified. It said a geology student from the university had stumbled upon skeletal remains which were later identified through dental records as Michael J. Rourke. The cause of death was officially listed as animal predation, consistent with a black bear. The article mentioned they found him in a heavily wooded, rocky area. There was no mention of a cave, no mention of a collection of personal effects, and certainly no mention of a 7-foot-tall canine creature's corpse. What happened to it? Did the sheriff's department find it and a quiet official cleanup crew from some 3-letter agency came and sanitized the scene? Or, and this is the thought that keeps me awake, did something else come up from that fissure after I left? Did they come to collect their dead sentinel and in the process find the human remains I'd led the authorities to? Did they clean up the site themselves? Weeks later, when the first snows had started to fall, I went back. I had to know. I took the shotgun this time. When I got to the ravine, the place was different. A massive section of the basalt wall had collapsed. Tons of rock and earth had sheared off, completely burying the spot where the fissure had been. It looked like a natural rock slide, the kind that happens all the time in the Cascades during the freeze-thaw cycle. But it was too perfect, too neat. The scene was sterile. The doorway was closed. Life after that day is divided into a before and an after. Before, the woods were my sanctuary, a place of quiet contemplation and simple discovery. After, they became a borderland, the edge of a territory that does not belong to us. I sold my rock collection. I don't go out there anymore, not for any reason. My world has shrunk to the half-acre of cleared land around my house. I installed motion sensor floodlights. I reinforced the doors and windows. Sam passed away from old age a year later, and I haven't had the heart to get another dog. The silence around my property is too heavy without him. I spend a lot of time online now. I started researching disappearances in national parks and forests across North America. You've probably heard of the phenomenon, people vanishing without a trace, often from areas where a massive search and rescue operation should have found something. I started cross-referencing the locations of these disappearances with geological survey maps, and I found a pattern. A disturbing number of these clusters of missing people occur in areas with deep cave systems, karst topography, or significant tectonic fault lines. Places with easy access to the world below. I don't call it a dogman. The term feels too much like folklore, too small for what I saw. I think of it as a sentinel, a gatekeeper. And the one I found was old, injured, and at the end of its watch. In its final moments, did it feel something akin to pity? Did it see in me a fellow creature aware of its own mortality? Or was its gesture a final act of spite against the very system it served? A way of showing me, an outsider, the terrible secret it had spent its life guarding? I'll never know. I only know that for a brief moment, 2 intelligent beings from different worlds acknowledged each other in a dark crack in the earth. I think about my old job. We dealt with secrets, with hidden truths that ran parallel to the everyday world. We operated in the shadows. But this was something else. This was evidence that the shadows themselves have inhabitants. My entire professional life
was based on the premise that with enough data, anything could be understood, cataloged, and managed. That experience taught me that some things are not meant to be managed. They are meant to be avoided. My skepticism, which was once a shield, now feels like a blindfold I was forced to wear. To be a true observer, you have to be open to all data, even the data that shatters your framework of reality. I saw what I saw, a creature of nightmare and legend, dying with a profound and human-like sadness in its ancient eyes. So, why tell this story? It's not for fame, God knows.
I've spent my life avoiding attention. It's not for money. It's a confession, a testimony. It's my data point entered into the public record. Maybe someone else out there, a hunter, a park ranger, another quiet man living on the edge of the woods, has seen something similar. Maybe they've felt that pressurized silence or smelled that sick, coppery rot on the wind. Maybe this will help them feel less crazy. Maybe it will convince them to turn back when their dog starts acting strange. That's the real reason. It's a warning. We think we're at the top of the food chain. We've mapped the globe. We've put satellites in orbit. We carry the sum of human knowledge in a little glass rectangle in our pockets. We've built our civilization on the comforting illusion that we have conquered the wild, that the dark places on the map are all filled in. But they're not. The map is a lie. There are still deep, dark places, not just in the jungles or the abyssal plains of the ocean, but right under our feet. Under the national parks you hike in, under the forests you camp in. And those places have their own inhabitants, with their own rules and their own ancient appetites. My advice is simple. Trust your instincts. Not your thoughts, your instincts. That primal, animal part of your brain that we spend our whole lives trying to suppress. If the woods suddenly go silent, leave. If the hair on your arms stands up for no reason, leave. If you feel that weight, that pressure of being watched, do not try to find the source. Do not let your curiosity override your fear. Fear is a data point too, and it's the oldest and most reliable one we have. The image that haunts me most isn't the creature's mangled leg or its clawed hands. It's the memory of its eyes as I squeezed past it in the dark. There was no monster in them. Just a vast, weary intelligence and a deep, inconsolable pain. And the knowledge that it died guarding a doorway that leads down into a dark from which no one returns. I live with that knowledge now. I live with the memory of those sounds, the humming and the moaning from the fissure. I live knowing that my little, well-lit house is just an island in a very old, very deep ocean. And I was shown, just for a moment, what swims in the dark. And I know that they are patient.